Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today to our Zoom information session. My name is Dan Truman, and I am a proud recruitment officer here at Loyalist College. I have Eric Hyandal with me today, coordinator for the Computer Systems Technician Program. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Excellent. Eric, before we get into the program, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
So I am actually a college graduate, a three-year diploma in electronics. And I ended up, my first job was at the Toronto Airport, and I worked for the Ministry of Transport for 5 years. And that was a good experience. I got lots of training, lots of experience on communication systems. And then from there, I ventured off into the television business, and I was a broadcast engineer for some 35 years. And it kind of culminated with me coming to the college and teaching, as you know, broadcast engineering. And I guess I like to always go back to the history of how things started, but I can vividly remember sitting with colleagues, and when we were looking at the introduction of one of the very first personal computers, everyone, well, we were techie guys and we were just anxious to get our hands on it, but then the discussion was, what would you ever use this thing for?
Yeah.
Well, to say that in today's world, the personal computer is not only ubiquitous, but essential would be almost an understatement.
Absolutely.
Definitely the personal computer is what spawned this whole IT revolution. Without that, we would not be where we are today. But the other piece of the puzzle that was missing was the ability to connect computers together, and that we call networking. And this isn't the kind of networking where you're meeting people, but rather you're connecting machines together. So the best story I had about networking was in the late 60s, early 70s. There was an outfit called ARPANET, which was a military network for basically for research. And the very first message that ever got sent was LO. And LO was an attempt by somebody in Sanford Research Center to connect, and was attempting to type login, and he got as far as LO and the computer crashed. So it tells volumes, that story, because networking was in its infancy, everything was unreliable. Today, it's very different. When you go to your phone, you want to send a text, or you want to go to email, all of that stuff works reliably today. And it's all because we've figured out how to make networking reliable.
Absolutely.
And that really is one of the jobs that the students are going to be engaged in, is increasing their company's reliability and security.
Well, it's a very important thing. I mean, especially these days, definitely the networking side for sure. Moving from that, can you tell us a little bit about the Computer Systems Technician Program?
The program is relatively new, and I think it addresses a real need that because everybody is so dependent on computers, that preparing students for that world that they're going to be living in, which is to maintain a computer system, configure it, and troubleshoot it, is going to be a very desirable skill. So we created the Computer Systems Technician Program with that in mind. And then you might ask, well, how do students learn in the program? Well, generally speaking, every course is broken down into two parts, just generally speaking. So the first part would be the lecture session. So we'll start with a lecture to talk about the relevant material that the student needs to know. And then we follow it up with a lab session where they actually get to put all of those concepts into use. And we have experiential learning involved. Well, certainly it's one of the hallmarks of the program is that anything that we do, we can talk about it in a lecture forum, but we need to follow it up with experiential learning so the student actually gets hands-on and gets to touch the equipment and do the adjustments and make the connections that are required. Most students, particularly in a two-year program like this, are very concerned about, they don't want to be bored to tears in a lecture environment all the time. They want to be touching equipment and making it work. And so that's the way we proceed.
And I guess that's kind of what makes your program very unique.
Yeah, well, two things. One is our focus on the hands-on part of it. But the other thing is, and as you pointed out, is the people involved, the people teaching the courses all
Absolutely.
have relevant experience and lots of it. So it's pretty hard today to find someone that actually grew up with the advent of computers coming
Yeah.
into this world. And so
We're preparing the
so that's a
next
great
generation.
asset. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Eric, can you tell us a little bit
So,
about the space where your students learn?
yeah, so the space is one that I designed actually. So the way we did it was to say, we'd like to emulate the average computer system that a business or even a school would engage in. And I often get asked by the students, I had a student ask me if I was working for Microsoft. And I said, no. I said, but when you leave here, what kind of systems do you think you're going to be touching? And then I had to point out that Microsoft has now exceeded 1 billion installations of Windows.
Oh my
So
goodness.
there's a reason why we go with the popular software packages. It's because that is what they're going to be working on when they leave. And in any case, what we find is there's a mixture of students coming into the classroom with either Android phones or Apple phones. And it doesn't really matter. The basics that we're teaching are going to apply to any of those products. But the lab itself, then we organized it so that we could start with the concept of doing peer-to-peer networking. That is, that you could establish a connection and talk to somebody in the same room or in another building, but a very simple sort of connection. And then we move into, well, what does a domain look like, and what are the advantages of going with a domain, much like we would have in the college or in a small business. And so those are the important skills that are going to be valued by the industry in particular. The lab was designed in that way, and I tried to make as many workstations as I could so we could have multiple students experiencing Windows Server as an example at one time as possible.
Absolutely. And I know group work must be a pretty significant part of your program by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I always say that you really don't have a choice when you get into the working world who you're going to work with.
Absolutely.
So you really need to be able to work with anybody. And I always throw in a session where I pair people up, and sometimes they don't know each other or they're not even fond of each other, but by the end of it, they're working together to bring a solution. I think the last one we did was an in-depth review of the browser market, because nothing says surfing the web like choosing a browser, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if you know, but Microsoft Edge is now moved into second place. So they're actually threatening Chrome now, so which is very interesting.
Well, that is, I know Google Chrome is the go-to for everybody.
Yeah.
Seems like, so yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so there you go. So in terms of graduates and their success, I think one of my favorite stories has to be, so we rely heavily on an organization called the Advisory Committee. So the Program Advisory Committee is constituted of industry experts that come to us and sort of donate their time, and they're the ones telling us what the industry really needs. Now, we have a pretty good idea, but they really confirm what it is we should be teaching and what our grads need to have in the way of skills to be able to get a job. So in one of our very first cohorts, we had a student, and he became the student rep. So he was invited to the program advisory meeting, and there's a time for the student to speak up and talk about the program and how he felt it was going. And so his skills were on full display. And it turned out that the director of IT services at the college, who was also on that program advisory committee, eventually offered him a job and hired him. And we see him almost every day in the college while we're there, behind the help desk. His name is Tushar Bala. So,
absolutely. Yes, I know Tushar. I know Tushar.
Yeah. So Tushar is a great success story, and there are many more of them as we go on. Students that have moved into IT positions, and then they will send me a note to say that thanks very much, you made it all possible, or something like that. And so that's pretty grand. It really comes down to how hard the student works. So
absolutely. Well, that's great to hear. You know, while we're on that service desk subject, it seems like every kind of company nowadays has some sort of, you know, help desk or service desk. It's for me, those jobs would be very plentiful. And it sounds
one of the
kind of gives them every kind of competitive edge to move into a position like that.
Oh, completely agree. And one of the courses that I ran was a communications course. And what we did was we actually bought a piece of help desk software. But before we went out to make the purchase, we gave each one of the students a competing product. So we had 13 students in the class, and each one of them was representing a different help desk software package.
Oh, very cool.
They had to do a presentation, and then at the end of it, we had a big vote, and it came down to which one they all thought was going to be the best. And so we agreed on the best one, and then the college went off and bought that software package.
Oh. Very cool. So
yeah. So
these projects are turning into real life programs for industry.
Yeah, it's always another theme is that you have to look at the financial side of the equation and the function side as well, and then you make a determination on what you're going to buy. So that's a real world experience, right, that you are going to have when you get out. Somebody's going to come to you as a computer systems technician and say, what PC do you think we should buy? Or what kind of networking do you think we should engage in, IPv4 or IPv6? And so you've got to have an opinion.
Those are the guys where you buy a piece of software and it says minimum requirements and you don't know, what you're looking at, but then you phone, a graduate from your program and they'll tell you exactly what you need, right?
Exactly. So.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, I thank you so much for going through your program in detail. I do have one last question for you though. What do you love most about Loyalist?
I like the destination college part of Loyalist, to be honest. It's really nice to be in my office and looking out and having fields of grass and stuff to look at rather than being in an urban setting. So I'm kind of a rural guy, I guess. Yeah,
me as well. I totally agree. Eric, again, I thank you so much for discussing Loyalist Computer Systems Technicians program with us today.
Okay.
And for those of you who have any further questions about Eric's program or any other programs at Loyalist, I strongly urge you to visit our website to book an advising appointment. You can also email recruiter@loyalistcollege.com. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you.